Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today it's all about conceptual thinking.
Ooh, interesting.
I know, right? And you know how we always start these deep dives?
By diving headfirst into some fascinating Thai sources.
You got it. And let me tell you, these sources are packed with insights into how our minds make sense of the world.
So it's like how we organize all that knowledge swirling around in our brains.
Exactly. The sources use all these cool metaphors like comparing our minds to warehouses.
Warehouses.
Yeah, and even like entire cities. It's wild.
Wow, cities. That's a pretty big mental image.
Right. But what really struck me was this idea that conceptual thinking isn't just about like storing information.
It's got to be more than just storing stuff, right?
Right. It's about actively building relationships between those pieces of information.
So less like a hoarder's garage and more like, I don't know, a well-organized library.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, instead of just books, it's everything we know about the world.
I like that. And just like a good librarian can help you find exactly what you need.
Strong conceptual thinking skills help you access the right knowledge at the right time.
Ooh. So it's like having a superpower.
Kinda. One source actually called this process systematic organization, which sounds less exciting,
Yeah, less exciting.
but it really gets to the heart of it.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? I mean, I can barely keep my desk organized,
Uh-huh. Tell me about it.
let alone my entire brain. Do the sources offer any practical tips?
Oh, they totally do. They suggest starting with mind maps. Have you ever used one of those?
Definitely. I love how mind maps can take a jumbled mess of thoughts
Yeah, it's like magic.
and turn them into something visually clear.
Exactly. And that's exactly what the sources are getting at. Mind mapping helps us see the connections
Ooh, the connections.
between seemingly totally random ideas.
It's like a blueprint for our mental city.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But it's not just about visualization, right?
there's got to be more to it.
The sources also dive into this idea of active engagement with information.
Active engagement, so not just passively taking it all in.
Exactly. We need to be asking questions, challenging assumptions, and looking for patterns. One source even compared it to detective work.
Oh, I like that. So we're not just building a city, we're also solving mysteries within it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But how do we know if we're doing it right?
Well, the sources say that by actively questioning and investigating information.
So, like, really getting our hands dirty with the information.
Yeah. We create stronger connections in our minds, which leads to deeper understanding.
It's not enough to just have a bunch of facts crammed into our mental warehouse.
We need to be able to use those facts, apply them to different situations.
I see. So it's like having all the ingredients but not knowing how to cook.
That's a great way to put it. And the sources argue that the broader our conceptual understanding,
The bigger our mental pantry.
yes, the better equipped we are to handle any challenge that comes our way. This is a fascinating example of a chef. Imagine a chef who only knows how to cook a handful of dishes.
Versus a chef who's like a master of all cuisines.
Exactly. The chef with a broader conceptual understanding of cooking can adapt to any ingredient, any customer request, any culinary challenge. They have a richer mental spice rack to draw from, so to speak.
Okay, now I'm getting hungry. This idea of a diverse mental inventory makes total sense to me.
Right. It's powerful stuff.
It's like the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more problems you can solve. But how do we even begin to build that kind of diverse mental inventory? I mean, where do we even start?
That's where it gets really interesting, and that's what we'll dive into after a quick...
Hold on, before we move on.
Yeah.
Are any of these sources, like, disagreeing with each other? It'd be fascinating to see how different approaches to conceptual thinking might clash.
That's a great point, and one I should have brought up earlier.
What is it?
It's true. Not all the sources are totally on the same page. There are some key differences in how they define conceptual thinking.
Ooh, this is where it gets juicy. Tell me more.
So, one source, for example, emphasizes this idea of automatic categorization. It argues that our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world.
Even when we're not really thinking about it.
Exactly. Like when you see a new object, your brain automatically tries to categorize it. Is it a plant? An animal? A tool?
So our brains are already building basic concepts and making connections without us even realizing it.
But this source makes a distinction between that automatic process and what it calls deliberate conceptual thinking.
Deliberate.
Yeah, which involves more conscious effort, analysis, and questioning. This is where those mind maps and the detective work come into play.
So it's like there's a spectrum of conceptual thinking, from the automatic to the intentional.
That's a great way to put it. And the sources that focus on this spectrum argue that both ends are important. The automatic categorization helps us navigate the world efficiently, while the deliberate conceptual thinking allows us to solve complex problems and come up with innovative ideas.
It makes you wonder if there are ways to improve both ends of that spectrum, right?
I like that.
Like, can we train our brains to be better at automatic categorization? And can we get better at that deeper, more deliberate thinking?
Now, those are questions I think we need to unpack.
We need answers.
And guess what? The sources actually offer some specific techniques and strategies for doing just that.
Okay, I am officially hooked. Tell me everything.
Well, hold on to that excitement because we'll dive into those practical tips right after.
Oh,
Okay, so remember all those delicious metaphors we were talking about before the break?
the mental skyscrapers and spice racks? Yeah, those were pretty tasty.
Well, now it's time to get practical. The sources have a ton of tips for actually boosting our conceptual thinking skills.
Give it to me straight. I'm ready to level up my thinking.
All right, so one that really resonated with me was this idea of treating your brain like a muscle.
Like hitting the mental gym.
Exactly. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Makes sense. I mean, I know I got to exercise to keep my body in shape.
So why not give your brain a workout too? And just like physical exercise, there are different types of mental workouts.
Ooh, like brain yoga. I'm intrigued.
Kind of. One that the sources highlight is something called the Feynman technique. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yeah, the Feynman technique. Isn't that where you try to teach a concept to someone else?
You got it. And it doesn't even matter if you have an actual student.
Like I could just explain it to my cat.
Exactly. Or to a rubber duck, or even just an imaginary friend. The point is, by forcing yourself to articulate the concept in simple terms, you expose any gaps in your own understanding.
So it's like those times when you think you know something, but then when you try to explain it, you realize you actually don't.
Exactly. And those aha moments are where the real learning happens. The Feynman technique really pushes you to go beyond just surface-level understanding and grapple with the core principles.
Okay, I'm definitely adding that to my mental workout routine. What other techniques do the sources recommend?
Another big one is connecting new knowledge to things you already know.
It's like building bridges between different islands in your mind.
That's a great analogy. Instead of just having isolated bits of information floating around, we're creating a network, a web of interconnected ideas.
Ooh, I like the image of a web, but what do we do with that web?
Well, that's where the real magic happens. Because conceptual thinking isn't just about abstract knowledge, it's about using that knowledge to make decisions, solve problems, and create something new.
So it's like we're not just building a mental toolbox, we're actually using those tools to build something real.
Exactly. And the more we apply our knowledge, the more refined and robust our conceptual understanding becomes.
So it's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. The sources suggest actively seeking out opportunities to use what we've learned, whether it's at work, in our hobbies, or even in our everyday interactions.
I never thought about it like that. So it's all about being proactive, finding ways to connect those mental dots to the real world.
That's the key. And, the sources even suggest that we can use our existing interests as springboards for expanding our conceptual understanding. Like, let's say you're passionate about, I don't know, collecting vintage comic books.
Oh, now you're talking my language.
Well, you can use that passion as a starting point for exploring all sorts of related concepts. Maybe you delve into the history of comic book art, or the psychology of storytelling, or even the economics of the collectible market.
I see what you mean. It's like using those existing bridges in my mind to reach new islands of knowledge.
Exactly. And each new connection you make strengthens the entire network, making you a more adaptable, creative, and confident thinker.
This is mind-blowing. I'm going to have to rethink my entire approach to learning. But before we move on, what about those sources that we're talking about automatic categorization? Did they offer any tips for improving that skill?
They did. And get this, one of the best ways to improve our automatic categorization is to expose ourselves to more diversity.
Diversity, you mean like traveling to different places, meeting new people?
That's part of it. But it also means engaging with different viewpoints, different cultures, different subjects. The more diverse our experiences, the more refined our mental categories become.
So if I want my brain to be a well-oiled categorization machine, I need to feed it a variety of inputs.
Exactly. And the sources argue that this applies not just to our external experiences, but also to our internal mental landscape.
What do you mean by that?
They encourage us to actively cultivate a more diverse inner dialogue.
So like having conversations with myself. But make it interesting.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Something like that. It's about engaging with viewpoints that challenge our own, questioning our assumptions, and embracing intellectual humility.
Sounds like it's all about being open-minded and willing to learn from anything and everything.
Absolutely. And the sources emphasize that this mindset is crucial for navigating a world that's increasingly complex and interconnected.
This is all starting to feel very profound. So what's the big takeaway here?
The sources are pretty clear on this one. Strong conceptual thinking skills are no longer just a nice to have, they're essential for thriving in the 21st century. Whether you're a student, an entrepreneur, an artist, or just someone who wants to make sense of the world, the ability to think conceptually is a superpower that can unlock your full potential.
Wow, a superpower. I'm sold. But before we go, declare ourselves conceptual thinking superheroes.
Hold on to that thought,
Yeah.
because there's one more crucial aspect of this whole process that we haven't even touched on yet.
Ooh, there's more. This is like a conceptual thinking onion with layers upon layers of insight. What else is there?
Well, the sources all seem to agree that conceptual thinking isn't just an individual sport.
We're not going solo on this.
It's a team effort.
Wait, so we're talking about group conceptual thinking, like how teams can work together to solve problems.
You got it. And this is where things get really exciting. Because when we bring together different perspectives, different mental warehouses, different ways of connecting the dots,
Wait, are you saying that we can combine our powers to create something even greater?
you nailed it. But it's not just about having a bunch of smart people in a room.
There's got to be more to it.
There are specific techniques and strategies that can amplify group conceptual thinking.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me everything.
Well, before we unlock that next level of conceptual power, we need to take a quick.
Okay, so we've talked about building our own mental skyscrapers, but now I'm really curious about this group conceptual thinking thing.
It's pretty amazing. Imagine combining the strengths of different thinkers.
Yeah, like a brain trust.
Exactly, each with their unique perspectives and mental tools. The potential for breakthroughs is huge.
But I imagine it's not as simple as just throwing a bunch of smart people in a room and hoping for the best.
Definitely not. The sources that talk about this really highlight the importance of structured collaboration.
Structured collaboration.
Yeah, one source even compares it to a jazz band.
A jazz band. Okay, now I'm really curious.
So think about it. Each musician has their own instrument and expertise.
Right, but they all work together.
They're all listening and responding to each other in real time. There's a shared understanding of the underlying melody.
But there's also room for improvisation.
Exactly. You need that flexibility and openness
Yeah.
to build upon each other's ideas.
So it's like you need a solid foundation of shared knowledge.
Right, like a shared musical language.
But you also need that spark of creativity to really make something special,
Exactly. And just like a jazz band needs a conductor,
to keep everyone in sync.
yeah, effective group conceptual thinking benefits from a facilitator.
Someone to guide the conversation.
Yeah, encourage active listening, make sure everyone's voice is heard.
So it's not just about brainstorming, it's about creating the right environment for those ideas to flourish.
Precisely. And the sources suggest several techniques for creating that kind of environment.
Like what?
Well, one that really stood out to me was this idea of constructive controversy.
Constructive controversy. Isn't controversy usually a bad thing?
It can be, but the key here is constructive. It's about encouraging team members to respectfully challenge each other's assumptions.
So like healthy debate.
Exactly. Present alternative viewpoints and engage in, well, yeah, healthy debate.
So you're not shying away from conflict, you're actually using it as a tool to generate new ideas.
Exactly. The sources argue that when done right, constructive controversy can lead to more robust solutions.
Because you've considered all angles.
Yeah. The team has considered a wider range of perspectives and potential pitfalls.
It's like pressure testing your ideas before you launch them into the world. But I imagine this requires a certain level of trust within the group, right?
Absolutely. People need to feel comfortable speaking their minds.
Even if it goes against the grain.
Exactly. The sources emphasize that fostering this kind of open and supportive environment is crucial for successful group conceptual thinking.
It makes you wonder if these principles could be applied beyond just teams, right? Like, what if we could use these techniques to foster constructive dialogue within communities or even entire societies?
That's a really interesting thought, especially in a world that often feels so divided.
If we could harness the power of group conceptual thinking to tackle those big, complex challenges that we're all facing.
The possibilities are endless. We could tap into a collective intelligence.
Wow, a collective intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm inspired. I'm going to start looking for ways to apply these principles in my own life, both individually and in groups.
That's the spirit. And remember, conceptual thinking is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn
Always more connections to make.
and more ways to grow.
So, to wrap up, we've learned that conceptual thinking is about organizing knowledge systematically,
Making connections between ideas
applying those ideas to real-world problems.
and constantly seeking out new experiences and perspectives,
And we've discovered that it's a skill that can be developed and strengthened through deliberate practice.
both individually and in groups.
Whether you're building a mental skyscraper, stocking your mental spice rack, or jamming with your conceptual jazz band.
The power of conceptual thinking is within your reach.
So go out there, embrace those aha moments, and keep those mental gears turning.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And until next time, keep those minds sharp.